A man who outruns his past will find it waiting for him at every door he opens. Silas Thorne never put much stock in parlor wisdom. He believed in the solid weight of a saddle, the cold truth of a colt, reclusive, and the unyielding pressure of the territorial marshal's badge against his heart. Belief was for preachers, action was for men. But on a searing Tuesday afternoon in the late summer of 1883, when the past walked through the doors of the Iron Horse Saloon, wearing a woman's travel-worn face, Silas learned that truth cared little for a man's belief system. Silas sat deep in his corner booth, meticulously rolling a cigarette. The slow ritual was his anchor. Paper, loose tobacco, roll, press, lick. He struck a match with his thumbnail, the sulfur scent momentary, then inhaled deep. Smoke ghosted from his nose just as the batwing doors slapped shut behind a newcomer. She moved with an unnerving purpose. Dust powdered her brown dress and boots, a sign of hard miles. Her gaze swept the room once, then locked onto him. "I am Mrs. Silas Thorne," she announced. The immediate silence was thick and complete. The Iron Horse held maybe 24 souls. Ranchers, a few prospectors playing poker near the hazy light of the window, and old Jebediah picking a mournful tune on the out-of-tune upright piano. Sunlight sliced the smoky air into dusty golden columns. Silas, 34 and 6 feet of coiled wire, hadn't smiled in years. He wasn't smiling now. The smoke was trapped in his lungs, and his mind was a single panicked question. When did I lose my damn mind enough to tie a knot with anybody? "Ma'am," Silas drawled, slowly setting his smoke down on the table's edge. "You've got the wrong man. I am not married." "I do not," she countered. Her voice, clear and steady, sliced the tension like glass. It was not loud, but it demanded attention. Jebediah's fingers froze mid-chord. Every head in the saloon pivoted between the marshal and the woman. "You are Silas Thorne?" she asked, her dark eyes unblinking. "I am." "Then I have the right man." Her hand disappeared inside her coat pocket. Every man tensed, hands hovered over holsters. But she pulled out no gun, only a piece of brittle yellowed paper. She walked forward, the slight thud-thud of her boots barely audible beneath the sudden, ferocious thumping in Silas's own chest. She stopped 3 feet away, near enough that he could smell sage and distance on her. With slow, deliberate care, she unfolded the paper. "This is a marriage certificate," she stated. "Signed by you, witnessed by a preacher named Elias Rudge, dated June 14th, 1879. That makes it 4 years, 4 months, and 11 days since you became my husband." She laid the truth on the table between them. Silas didn't touch it. His eyes found the cramped formal script, then his own name, and finally his signature. It was undeniably his, down to the sloppy curve of the S he never liked. His stomach plummeted. "That's not possible," he grated out. "It's intensely possible," she replied. "It happened." A rough, disbelieving laugh broke the silence from the poker table, then another. Soon the entire saloon was snickering. "Marshal's got a forgotten wife. That's rich," someone yelled. She ignored the laughter, keeping her gaze pinned to Silas. "Do you remember a place called Dawson's Pass?" The tension returned, heavier than before. He remembered. A miserable, frozen stretch of the Northern Territories where he'd been tracking the infamous Ketchum gang. He'd caught one, but the bastard had put a slug in him. The following week was a blur of fever, pain, and hallucinated snow. "I remember it," he admitted, his hand instinctively tightening around the cigarette paper. "Then you remember me." "I don't." A flicker of something deep and painful crossed her face. Not anger, but profound disappointment. "You were shot," she whispered, her voice tightening. "Gave up too much blood. I found you and kept you alive for 6 days. You were delirious, half dead. On the 6th day, a traveling preacher came through. You woke long enough to ask him to marry us. You said you didn't want to die alone. You wanted me protected." Silas stared. The cabin, the pain, a soft, high singing in the darkness. Those things he remembered, but her face was a blank space. "I woke up on the 7th day," he said, the words heavy. "I was alone." "I know," she said, her composure cracking slightly. "You left while I was at the creek fetching water." "What is your name?" he asked, quiet desperation lacing the question. "Mercy Thorne," she stated, Born Mercy Callahan, but I've been using your name for 4 years, whether you knew it or not. Silas picked up the yellowed paper, tracing the ink. It was real, every detail, every smudge, the faulty curve of the H in his surname. It was him. Suppose this is real, he conceded, the word tasting like rust. Why come back now? Why not 4 years ago? Mercy hesitated. For the first time, her iron control slipped, revealing the exhaustion beneath the dust. I tried. I went to Silver Ridge looking for you. They said you joined a posse and rode south. By the time I tracked you to this valley, you were wearing that star and living like your life began here. I figured you didn't want to be found, so I gave up. Her eyes, dark and intelligent, flashed with a deep-seated pride. I built a life. I didn't need you to survive. Then why are you here, Mercy? He pressed. She looked away toward the dirty windows, then back, her hands moving restlessly at her sides. She made a decision. Because the men you arrested 4 years ago got out of prison last month, and they know about me. The words landed not like stones, but like cold lead. Silas felt the familiar instinct to fight, to protect, override the shock. He focused only on the threat. His hand brushed the cool metal of his badge. Which men? The Ketchum brothers, she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. Barrett and Sterling, stage robbery outside Silver Ridge. You put them away for 4 years. They were released 2 weeks ago, and they burned my seamstress shop to the ground in Pine Hollow, looking for me. They think I have documents, proof, something related to their original arrest. Did you? No, but they don't believe that. And now, they know I'm looking for you, Silas. Showing up here, it was necessary. I didn't come for a reunion. I came for cover. He stared at the woman, his wife, who stood bruised, tired, yet unyielding. She wasn't seeking pity. She was demanding protection. She was legally due. He nodded, the single curt motion signaling the Marshal's acceptance of a grave assignment. All right, Mercy Thorne, he said, pushing his chair back. The scrape of wood on the floor was deafening. We're leaving the saloon, now. We take this to the cabin. The town's gossip was already afire that would engulf them both. But the cabin, his small, isolated space overlooking the valley, was the only place he felt he could control. They rode out of town without speaking, Mercy mounted behind him on his horse, her hands gripping his belt. The intimacy of her body pressed against his back, the scent of travel and soap in his nostrils, was a foreign, jarring sensation. He had spent years cultivating an armor of solitude. Now, it was pierced by the softness of a woman he had married on his deathbed. The cabin was 2 rooms of rough-hewn pine, meticulously organized. Boots by the door, rifle rack straight, everything in its place. When they stepped inside, Mercy didn't look around with curiosity. She looked with recognition. She moved to the crude pine table and traced a knot in the wood, then ran her hand along the edge of the iron stove. You remember this place? Silas asked, suspicious. No, she said, pulling off her dusty gloves. I've never been here. Then why are you acting like you have? She turned to face him, a faint, weary smile touching her lips. Because I know you, Silas. I spent 6 days watching you fight for your life. You talked in your sleep. You told me your life story, your routines, your fears. Your mother died of consumption when you were 12. Your younger brother, Ethan, drowned when you were 16. And you've never forgiven yourself for not being there. You talked about the perfect order you needed because your life felt like chaos. Your boots go by the door, lined up straight, your gun on the table. You don't like clutter, don't like surprises. Silas felt the blood drain from his face. She spoke of things he had never uttered sober. Those were the ghosts he kept locked away. You know me better than I know myself right now, he stated, his voice tight. I know the man you were when you thought you were dying, she corrected. We'll see who you are now. She unbuttoned her coat and hung it on the middle peg, the loose, wobbling one he never used. It was a subtle, almost aggressive act of claiming space. The bed is yours, he said stiffly. I'll take the floor. I am your wife, she countered, removing her hat. Her dark hair, released from the pins, fell in soft waves around her shoulders, suddenly feminine, devastatingly distracting. We share the bed. We are sharing nothing until I confirm that paper is legal, he shot back, his face heating. Mercy didn't argue. She simply looked at him, her expression resigned, as if she had expected this exact furious rejection. "Fine, I will make a pallet by the fire. I came here for safety, not for comfort." He pulled blankets from a trunk and tossed them near the stone hearth. He started the coffee ritual, the grinding of beans, a welcome, familiar noise to mask the tension. "Ask your questions," Mercy commanded from her makeshift bed. "Before the Ketchums get here, we need to know what we're fighting for." Silas poured 2 cups of bitter, scalding coffee and handed her one. He sat across the room, needing distance. "What else did I tell you? What made you marry a feverish ghost?" Mercy took a slow sip. "You asked me, Silas. You were scared. You said you had lived your life running from everything, and you didn't want to die with a meaningless name. You said you wanted to leave a legacy, even if it was just a wife who could claim your few dollars. You wanted a witness to your life. I married you because you asked me to, and because, for those 6 days, I thought you were the one man who would stop running if someone gave him a reason. I didn't stop. I rode out the minute I could sit a saddle." "I know," she said softly, staring into the flickering firelight. "I thought, maybe, if you survived, you would come back. After all, I had saved your life." "I'm sorry," he whispered, the apology tasting inadequate for 4 years of silence and abandonment. "Don't apologize," she said. "You don't remember. You can't regret something you never knew you did. But you are the man whose name I carry. And now, we have a common enemy. The Ketchums want something. We figure out what that is, and we figure out how to stop them. Together." The air in the cabin shifted, the tension transforming from marital conflict into a shared, dangerous purpose. Over the next few days, Silas maintained his routine, riding into the mining town of Red Rock for his Marshal duties. But he returned quickly, always alert. Mercy, meanwhile, transformed the cabin. She was an anchor he hadn't known he needed. She mended his clothes, baked bread, and scrubbed the grime of years from the floorboards. She had an efficiency that mirrored his own, but warmed it. One evening, he found her by the window, a thin beam of late sun catching the fine hairs on her neck. She was mending his torn riding shirt, her needle flashing with a hypnotic rhythm. "You're good at this," he observed, pouring coffee. "My mother was a seamstress in the East," Mercy replied without looking up. "Taught me everything. She died when I was 14, my father 2 years. Later, cholera. I've been on my own since 16. You came west alone." "Yes, I wanted to build something I owned, something stable." She tied off a thread and bit it clean. "The Ketchums took that from me when they burned my shop." Silas set the coffee down. "You think they'll come here?" "I know they will. Barrett and Sterling are patient, but not forgiving. They think I have evidence that makes their pardon shaky. They won't rest until they have it, or I'm dead. Then I'll wire the territorial marshal for backup. We'll hold them up when they show." "And on what charge, Silas?" she challenged, her eyes sharp. "Trespassing? They did their time. They're free men now. They are operating on the edge of the law. You can't shoot them for looking. You need proof, and they know it." She was right. The law was a clumsy tool, and the Ketchums were experts at revenge that skirted the edges of legality. "Then I'll protect you myself," he resolved, walking toward her, stopping close enough that the scent of wood smoke and her skin filled his senses. "I will make sure they know that if they come for you, they come for the law." "You don't owe me that," she said quietly. "Maybe not," Silas replied. "But I made a promise once. A man who breaks his word, whether he remembers it or not, isn't much of a man at all. I didn't keep it the first time. I intend to keep it now." Mercy looked up at him, her gaze intense, searching for the truth behind the Marshal's steel exterior. "You are a good man, Silas Thorne, even if you don't remember being mine." He didn't know how to respond to such a raw statement, so he simply stood there, letting the silence settle, his arm moving instinctively to rest on the back of her chair. It was a gesture of possession he hadn't intended, but couldn't retract. That night, Silas lay awake on the floor, his gun under his blanket, listening to the rain hammer the roof. Sometime after midnight, he heard it, quiet, ragged sobs coming from Mercy's pallet near the fire. She was curled tight, trying to muffle the sound of her grief. He wanted to cross the room, to touch her, to offer the basic human comfort that she had given him 4 years ago. But the walls of his reserve were still too high. He stayed put, listening to her heartache until it faded back into the sound of the rain. 3 days later, Mercy insisted on going into Red Rock with him. She needed supplies, and more importantly, she needed to find work. I won't be a burden, she told him. I will earn my keep. They rode in together, her sitting behind him, her hands wrapped around his waist. It was agonizingly intimate. Every shift of her body against his back sent a low current through him, a stark reminder of the missing years. The minute they entered the general store, the place went silent. The Red Rock gossip mill had been spinning furiously since her arrival. They walked through a gauntlet of stairs. Mercy, however, walked straight to the counter, head high. While she negotiated mending work with Mrs. Quincaid, the boarding house owner, Silas stood guard, his arms crossed, his face a mask of stone. No one dared speak a word to him. As they left, a drifter named Quinn staggered out of the Iron Horse, whiskey bottle in hand. "Hey, Marshal," Quinn slurred. "That your wife? Heard she just showed up. Sounds like a desperate woman looking for a free meal, if you ask me." Silas tensed, his hand dropping to his holster. But, before he could speak, Mercy stepped forward, her body language radiating controlled fire. "You calling me a liar?" she demanded, her voice sharp and clear. Quinn laughed, emboldened by the whiskey. "If the boot fits, ma'am, seems like a tall tale. And you have a drunk mouth for a man," Mercy shot back. "The marshal saw the marriage paper. The preacher signed it. If you call me a liar, you call the law a liar. Which is it, Quinn? Do you trust your whiskey or the star on his chest?" A few people chuckled. Quinn's face darkened. He tossed his bottle aside and took a belligerent step toward her. "That's enough," Silas growled, stepping instantly between them. His Colt was half drawn. "She is my wife. You have a problem. You take it up with me. Sober." Quinn glared, his eyes flicking to the Colt. He saw the cold, murderous intent in the marshal's face and backed down, stumbling into the saloon. Silas looked at Mercy. Her face was flushed, her fists clenched. The fire in her was breathtaking, terrifying. "You all right?" "I'm fine," she said tightly. "But I won't be quiet anymore. 4 years of being silent is enough." They made it back to the cabin. The immediate danger of the drifter was gone, but the larger shadow remained. "I need to tell you something," Mercy said that evening, after the lamps were lit. She was sitting at the table, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. "About the fire, about why I was so desperate." Silas waited, his stomach tightening with a terrible premonition. "After you left Dawson's Pass," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "After I realized you weren't coming back, I was with child." The shock was a physical blow. Silas felt the cabin spin. He had a son. "I didn't know for sure until 2 months later," Mercy continued, tears finally coming, shining on her face in the lamplight. "I was terrified, but happy. A part of you, a reason to keep going. I carried him through the winter, and in November, in Pine Hollow, I went into labor. He was a boy, Silas, small but breathing." She put her face in her hands. "He died 3 days later. His lungs weren't strong enough. The midwife said there was nothing to do. I buried him alone, in a small plot outside of town. Just me, the cold, and the ground." Silas stood, crossed the floor, and pulled her from the chair into his arms. He held her tight, his strength shaking as he absorbed the devastating truth. He had lost a son he never knew, and he had abandoned the woman who buried him. "What did you name him?" he asked, hoarsely, his own eyes burning. "Jasper," she choked out. "I named him Jasper." The name settled into his consciousness like a stone, heavy and permanent. He wasn't just a man who had forgotten a marriage. He was a man who had left a pregnant wife to face the frontier and death alone. "I'm sorry, Mercy," he whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry." "It's not guilt I want, Silas," she said, pulling back, her eyes red but fiercely honest. "It's not pity. It's the truth between us. I loved you in that cabin. I loved you, a dying stranger, because you were the only person who ever stopped running long enough to ask for a piece of life. I thought maybe, just maybe, we were meant to find each other again." "I am starting to think that too," he admitted, the words sincere. He leaned down and kissed her. This was not the quick, polite brush of lips. This was a deep, slow exploration, a blending of all the guilt, the loss, the fear, and the slow-burning attraction that had been simmering between them for days. Her lips were soft, yet held the strength he now knew was hers. He felt her hands creep up the back of his shirt, pulling him in, demanding not just intimacy, but ownership. When they finally broke apart, Both were breathing hard, the heat of the fire suddenly inadequate. "I am your wife, Silas," she whispered, her voice husky. "Then come to bed," he heard himself say, shedding the last vestiges of his self-imposed isolation. He picked her up, her light weight surprising him, and carried her to the narrow, worn bed. The clothes fell quickly, tossed aside with a feverish urgency born of years of repression and sudden, violent emotion. Skin met skin, calloused hands on soft curves, the rough texture of his working body against the smooth resilience of hers. The old bed frame groaned under their weight as they came together, not in gentle romance, but in a long, hard surge of shared history, regret, and fierce, primal need. It was a joining that felt less like love and more like a pact, a desperate physical confirmation that they were, against all odds, real. Later, sweat cooling, their limbs tangled, Mercy lay with her back to the fire, Silas holding her tight, his hand resting on the small of her back. "Thank you," she murmured. "For what?" "For giving us a chance, for not sending me away." "You're my wife," he repeated, the words no longer just comfort, but a vow. The following morning, they were no longer Marshal and widow. They were a unit. They spoke of Jasper, not in sorrowful whispers, but in quiet acceptance, a shared wound that bound them tighter than any paper. 3 days later, the threat arrived. Silas was checking the fence line when he saw 2 riders approaching slowly, deliberately. Barrett Ketchum, tall and scarred, rode point. His brother Sterling, stocky and mean-faced, lagged slightly behind. Silas moved like an old wolf scenting danger. "Mercy! Inside! Now!" She appeared in the doorway, saw the riders, and went white. She bolted the door, trusting him implicitly. Silas walked to the middle of the yard and waited, his hand hovering over his colt. The Ketchums stopped 20 feet away. Barrett dismounted, his movements economical, chillingly practiced. "Marshal Thorne," Barrett said, a lazy, poisonous smile stretching his scar. "Been too long?" "Not long enough, Ketchum. We're just passing through. Heard an old friend was in the area. Your wife, I hear. You actually marry that little bird? She's Mercy Thorne, and you're trespassing. We just want to talk to her, get back what she took." "She took nothing. You think I'd protect her if she did?" "You'd protect her because you're a fool who married her. Or maybe because she's hiding something valuable. Either way, we're taking her." Barrett's smile vanished. "We spent 4 years in a cage eating slop because of you. 4 years to think about what we're owed. Get out of the way, Marshal." "I'm protecting my wife," Silas said, drawing the Colt faster than thought. The shot cracked like a whip. Barrett's gun hand, already dropping to his own weapon, exploded in pain. His pistol spun away. Sterling simultaneously made his move, but Silas fired a second time, deliberately kicking dirt and gravel into the face of Sterling's horse. The animal reared, throwing Sterling hard to the ground. Silas stepped forward, his Colt trained directly on Barrett's heart. "The next shot isn't a warning. You step 1 inch toward that cabin, or if I see either of you within 10 miles of Red Rock, I will kill you. I'm a lawman. You're criminals. I have no problem killing a man who threatens my wife." Sterling scrambled onto his horse, nursing a bruised shoulder. Barrett, clutching his shattered hand, mounted awkwardly. "This ain't over," Barrett spat, his eyes burning with hatred. "It is for today," Silas replied, his voice flat, deadly. "Ride out." The Ketchums retreated. Silas watched them until they were tiny specks. The cabin door opened. Mercy ran out, her eyes wide. "You could have killed them." "I thought about it," Silas admitted, holstering the smoking Colt. "I decided the law deserved to win this time. Next time, I won't be so generous." She crossed the yard and stood beside him, her hands reaching out to steady his, which were trembling slightly from the adrenaline dump. "Thank you, Silas, for everything." He turned to her, his gaze intense. "I meant what I said. You're my wife. That means something. It means everything." Mercy didn't speak. She simply leaned in and kissed him, a kiss that tasted like gunpowder and gratitude, a powerful seal on the new violent reality they shared. 2 years passed. The Ketchum threat dissolved when Barrett was killed in a saloon brawl in Colorado. Sterling disappeared south of the border, but Mercy stayed. They didn't just survive, they built. Silas took off his marshal's badge and used his savings to buy a spread of land overlooking the valley. He built a house with 2 rooms and a proper porch. Mercy started a thriving mending and dressmaking business. They argued over small things, laughed over big ones, and learned each other's contours: her love for rain, his need for order, her occasional nightmares, his permanent low-level vigilance. They returned to Preacher Rudge, who had since moved to Red Rock, and renewed their vows. This time, Silas was wide awake, his promise conscious, his commitment absolute. This time, he vowed, holding her hands, I remember every second. By summer, Mercy was pregnant again. Silas was terrified, the ghost of Jasper a constant cold anxiety. But Mercy was calm, serene. This one's different, Silas, she told him one night, her hand resting on her growing belly. This time, I'm not alone. Their daughter, Adelia, arrived in February, screaming and robust. Silas held her, the small weight a sudden, overwhelming counterpoint to all the years of hard loneliness. Tears streamed down his face. He had a family, a legacy. He had stopped running. The ranch thrived, the thorn spread, becoming a symbol of grit and success. One evening, 2 years after Adelia's birth, Silas stood on the porch watching the sun sink, Mercy beside him, Adelia asleep on her hip. Smoke rose from their chimney, carrying the scent of supper. I love you, Mercy, he said suddenly, honestly. I love you too, she replied. Always have, even when you didn't remember me, especially then. She turned in his arms. Do you remember now? She asked, her voice quiet. Bits and pieces, he said. The fever, your voice singing, not everything, but enough. Enough for what? Enough to know that meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me, even if I didn't know it at the time. The hard road taught me what you were worth. They stood there as the sun vanished. Adelia stirred in Mercy's arms. Come on, Mercy whispered, tugging his arm. Let's go dance. Family men dance at the fair. She pulled him into a clumsy, joyful circle on the porch. He was no dancer, but he followed her lead, his heart swelling with a gratitude that felt more powerful than any gun or badge. He was home. The fall fair came to the thorn spread. Wagons crowded the field. Children ran wild. Silas stood on his land, surrounded by his community, his wife, and his daughter, watching the scene unfold with quiet pride. He had run from his past for years, and it had found him, waiting at his door. But the saying didn't mention what happened after. It didn't mention forgiveness or the profound, tender joy of building something beautiful out of the wreckage. That night, as the last lanterns faded down the road, Silas and Mercy went inside. They checked on Adelia, banked the fire, and lay down in their shared bed, the bed they now truly owned together. Thank you, Mercy whispered in the dark, for being willing to believe in something you couldn't remember. Best decision I ever made, Silas said, pulling her close. He wasn't lonely anymore. He wasn't free, not in the way he'd once understood freedom, but he was home. And that, Silas Thorne had learned, was worth more than all the freedom in the world.